Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the Emyria Limited Investor Webinar. My name is Jane Morgan, and today we'll be discussing Emyria's Phase 1 trial data for EMD-RX5, Emyria's proprietary ultra-pure CBD capsule, as well as their novel MDMA-analogue drug discovery pipeline. Emyria's Managing Director and CEO, Dr. Michael Winlo, will present the recently announced positive Phase 1 trial data for the EMD-RX5 crossover study with EPIDIOLEX. EPIDIOLEX is the only TGA and FDA-registered CBD medicine indicating excellent bioavailability, safety, and tolerability amongst 12 healthy and demographically diverse volunteer subjects. I will now hand you over to Dr. Michael Winlo.
Thank you so much, Jane. Okay, well, good morning. It's first day of winter. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time and attention this morning. It's a great pleasure to give an update on Emyria's great progress in our drug development programs over the last few months. Let's get into it. Okay, so really, what is Emyria's ultimate goal? We're here to accelerate drug development and drug registration. If you look at the traditional drug development pathway, normally it involves finding a target, generating a hit. This means finding something in the body that you can develop a drug treatment to interact with. And then if you've got that understanding, then you need to create a dose form that actually can work. You need to prove that it's safe, efficacious, and ultimately obtain regulatory approval. With Emyria, we're working with known drugs and targets, cannabidiol in one instance, MDMA-analogues in the other. We're trying to improve those dose forms so that they can become more effective. And then we can evaluate safety and efficacy in real patients that we care for. And through that, we can rapidly gather the evidence required to achieve registration, saving time, cost, and ultimately risk. And that's where we're generating value. So that makes us a biotech company that's developing treatments, but they're backed by data that we gather with patients that we provide care for. And we're one of the few biotechs that we know of that has assembled all of these strategic pillars in place. And so with that, you need a terrific team to kind of pull all that together. And we've got an amazing management and board with deep biotech experience. Collectively, more than 10 biotechs have been founded, funded and exited by these individuals, and more than 20 FDA approvals. Some key individuals here, Dr. Stuart Washer and Matt Callahan, well known in the Australian listed biotech space, having founded and been part of Botanics, Orthocell, and Sonata. So they cover regenerative medicines, cannabinoid treatments, and stem cell therapy. Professor Sir John Tuke was United for Services to Medicine in the UK. He is the ex-president of the Academy of Medical Sciences, an incredible clinician researcher who is part of our team guiding on the learning health systems that we're building in our clinics. Dr. Karen Smith is an incredible biotech and biopharma executive. She was the chief medical officer and global head of research and development at Jazz Pharmaceuticals, notable in our industry for having acquired GW Pharma, the makers of EPIDIOLEX, for $7.2 billion last year. She sat on multiple billion-dollar boards as well and brings tremendous executive experience at that level. Dr. Alistair Vickery is a professor of general practice, a very experienced clinician and population health researcher, and myself having a background in clinical trials, data analysis, and medicine. I think we bring together a really unique set of skills to drive this company forward. And this is what we look like so far. Last close price, 27.5 cents, gives us a market cap of around $75 million. But importantly, we've been on a growth trajectory for the last 12 months. And a few months ago, we brought on a keystone investor in Tadarang. This is the private wealth fund for Andrew Forrest. That group now owns 5% of our company with options to come in for more. And we're really delighted to have their strong support and also to recognize that our registry is tightly held with the directors and founders holding almost 30% of the company today. Great, that brings me to our treatments. So what have we developed? We have 2 parallel running drug development programs, each backed by some unique assets. For our clinical stage program in the cannabinoid medicine field, we have real-world data on more than 6,000 really diverse patients that we've cared for across our Emerald Clinics subsidiary. That's allowed us to develop unique dose forms targeted at specific clinical indications and problems that we have identified in that population, in that patient group through analysis of that data. And we've developed dose forms now that are taking their way through phase 1 and about to enter phase 3 pivotal clinical trials. We've got the EMD-RX5 program, which I'll speak about today, having recently completed phase 1 trials, but also coming up behind that, EMD-RX7 for high CBD dose exposures and some combination therapy treatments that we have in development also. And for each of those, we're pursuing really major markets. For EMD-RX5, beginning first for an over-the-counter indication in Australia, we think that's an attractive market. We can be one of the first to register a treatment in that space. But we've set things up so that EMD-RX5 can then pursue US registration for different indications, potentially larger market indications in the US and elsewhere. Also complementing our drug development program, however, is this MDMA-analogue pipeline. This is an asset of more than 100 uniquely developed MDMA-like medicines that we think have potential to become neurological and non-neurological treatments, and therefore address major mental health disorders that affect people globally. We're at the preclinical stage of that program. We are synthesizing and screening those compounds through a variety of in vitro screens, and we're preparing them now for animal studies, which will give us further insight on where to take that program next. So really uniquely got these really deep, very valuable and novel assets that we're driving forward. Let me first then explain the cannabinoid program. As I mentioned, we've got that incredible real-world data that's unique to Emyria to learn from. So we're learning from our own patients what's working. Then we're creating reliable and unique dose forms that we know are patient preferred and taking those to registration. So what are these problems that we're addressing? Well, one of the first key problems that we've been set up to try and address is the lack of clinical evidence, lack of high quality evidence to guide clinicians, researchers, regulators, and ultimately payers on where these treatments work most effectively. Cannabis, if you've been following the sector, is put up as being a great treatment for a myriad of conditions and indications, but the evidence behind those claims is sparse, dispersed, and hard to find. And so we saw an opportunity. We established a set of clinics. If we provided access to the cannabinoid treatments, if we paid close attention to how our patients were responding to these treatments, we could accelerate the gathering of knowledge, improve our understanding of where these treatments work best, and most importantly, identify opportunities to develop the next set of registered treatments for patients. So our experience covers a diverse patient group, more than 40 complex indications, and we've worked with and used more than 50 different unique products to get the best outcomes for our patients. So we know what works, and importantly, what dose appears to work most effectively. The other problem with cannabis, though, is its poor bioavailability. This is the ability of a medicine to make its way from the stomach into the bloodstream. CBD is notorious for this, of having a very low bioavailability, meaning only a very small percentage of the medicine that one swallows actually makes it into the bloodstream where it can do work. The reasons for that is it's got to get across the stomach, it's got to get past the liver, which is designed to break drugs down, and ultimately only a very small percentage of the medicine you take makes its way into the bloodstream where it can then travel to where it is needed to do its work. So designing a drug with really high bioavailability, or at least having a really deep understanding of how your bioavailability profile works in your treatment, is really, really crucial. And so we've developed our first solid oral dose form. We call it EMD-RX5. It's a small, white, convenient capsule that you can see in that top left corner picture. And recently, through a phase 1 trial, this is a study that you do in healthy individuals, we compared our drug head-to-head against the only registered CBD medicine in the world today, and that is EPIDIOLEX, originally manufactured by GW Pharma, acquired by Jazz Pharma for $7.2 billion US early last year. In that study, we were able to show that we were able to deliver equivalent drug to the bloodstream over 24 hours to EPIDIOLEX. And we're really pleased with that. We have some other advantages we'll explain. We're also able to see how we compared against other products which have published PK data. And we're actually really delighted with this result. as well. And so now we can also do something interesting from this information. We can now link our treatment to those of other products that we've prescribed in the clinic and get a better understanding of how our drug lines up and could perform in our patients. So this is a stylized schematic of the drug delivery profile in an individual over 24 hours. As you can see, after you take the drug at time 0 for the FDA registered oil Epidiolex, you get a large spike of CBD. It's released into the bloodstream relatively quickly, but it also falls away very quickly as well. So within a few hours, you've got much lower drug quantity in the bloodstream. EMDRX5, however, delivers drug in a consistent fashion over time, which means that you've got higher levels of the medicine available in the bloodstream to do work in the hours that you need it. So imagine you take a treatment at nighttime with your evening meal. You don't really want that drug to be wearing off or no longer having an effect, say around midnight or 1 a.m. The preferred profile is that this drug has a sustained release and can be delivering treatment over time, throughout the evening. And that's what we're able to see in our drug, EMDRX5. So we're really, really pleased with that dosing profile. The other key thing is that we have less interpatient variability. So when we give our treatment, it's a little more predictable what exposures a patient will receive compared to Epidiolex. Epidiolex was higher for some, lower for other individuals, and had more variation in the patient-to-patient concentration levels. So that consistency, that reliability, it was a really key feature. And ultimately, because we've developed something novel and new and formulated CBD in a way that has not been done before, we're very interested in the safety and tolerability, and really pleased to see we saw no adverse events of note for this novel solid oral dose form as well. So we showed that it was safe and tolerable, excellent bioavailability, and a preferred drug release profile. So an excellent outcome for RX5. Right. The other key thing to note is that we use an ultra pure CBD. So even against the gold standard registered CBD medicine and Epidiolex, there are some key differences. One, we know that our ultra pure CBD has equivalent action physiologically to the plant grown CBD alternative, but we have absolutely no detectable THC whatsoever and zero impurities, no heavy metals, pesticides, or other residues in our CBD. Using ultra pure CBD gives us a novel formulation that allows us to have some IP protection around that as well. We believe it achieves lower cost over the long term. And it's also interesting to point out that the ultra pure CBD can be manufactured with much lower environmental impact. Plant grown CBD requires a tremendous amount of energy, and in particular water, to get your material to a point where you can turn it into a pharmaceutical. Our ultra pure source uses far, far less CO2 emissions and water to achieve the same result. So we think it gives us some really good advantages. We're very pleased to be working with ultra pure CBD. Importantly, ultra pure is also accepted by the FDA. And so all of our drug development work and all of the trial efforts can support some of that FDA program submission as well. And so that paints out our picture for our cannabinoid medicines. We've got RX5, the leading drug candidate, which we think is a multi-indication treatment. We've now completed phase 1. We're preparing for our pivotal phase 3 for our first indication, which I'll talk about shortly, physiological distress, here for an over-the-counter indication in Australia. And we have others to follow. EMDRX7 is a drug that we're really excited about that can deliver even higher quantities of CBD. And so we see has a role for indications requiring higher CBD doses. And we've also got some combination treatments that are in development as well. Terrific. So how are we going to commercialize RX5? What's our strategy here? So the first step, as I mentioned, is the registration of RX5 in Australia as an over-the-counter treatment for psychological distress. We think the over-the-counter market's very attractive. TJ has been very clear on the rules of engagement, how to obtain a Schedule 3 registration. There are nearly 6,000 pharmacies around Australia, so we could have an incredible reach into patients that need it. We know that there's strong patient demand for a CBD treatment that doesn't require a prescription from a doctor to obtain. And so we estimate this market around $200 million a year. But of course, it's just this first stop on a longer journey where we see EMDRX5 heading, which is ultimately to US registration with the FDA in America. And that will require likely partnerships with major pharmaceutical companies as well. So physiological distress, it's probably worth clarifying that. Why that problem and what does that actually mean? Well, it's a condition affecting 15% of Australians, or nearly 4 million adult Australians. So it's a really highly prevalent condition. We know the incidence is on the rise. It's been a challenging couple of years. And so it's a condition that's getting increasing recognition in the mental health community. It is a collection of symptoms that can be characterized by mild symptoms of anxiety, stress, and depression. You can have sleep disturbance, GI upset. We know that the psychological distress is far more prevalent in patients with chronic health conditions as well. And we also know that there's no known over-the-counter treatment. So it's a unique opportunity that we're pursuing to be one of the first over-the-counter registered therapies for this condition. So for the short-term relief of the symptoms of psychological distress, that's the target indication we're going for. I think that's a massive opportunity. And so we're not talking about a chronic medication or medication we expect people to take forever. It's really to get through those difficult periods, reset yourself, and get on with life. And that, I think, could have a tremendous positive impact on patients and the well-being of many, many Australians. And so we're going straight to phase 3 now that we have finished our phase 1 study. So we've got the formulation design underway. We know how our drug performs in healthy volunteers. We have a great way of, we've got all of that real world data that tells us how we think these dose strengths are going to perform in real patients. And so we can go straight to pivotal studies and take all of our real world data as supporting safety evidence as well through our registration package. And so our trial is expected to kick off in the next month or so and last 4 to 5 months, helping us hit registration sometime towards the end of the year into the new year. Here's our design. We're going for a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial. There'll be 200 patients in a couple of arms for EMDRX5 against a placebo arm. We're looking at pain and stress as well in these patients. They'll be treated for 4 weeks, followed up for another 4 weeks. And so the entire study ultimately to run for about 4 to 5 months. We've already selected the 5 to 6 sites around Australia with partner clinical trials. And our own medical clinics can be a source of referrals, which gives us the confidence that we can recruit for this study incredibly quickly. Great. Now onto a psychedelic assisted program. I have fewer slides for this, so just a few key highlights here. But why get into the psychedelic assisted therapy space? Well, we know there's a major unmet need in major mental health disorders that's attracting a lot of interest in these newer frontier medicines, the psychedelic assisted therapy. These are treatments that are given alongside a very skilled and well-trained psychologist to support patients through their mental health conditions. The promise of some of the early research behind these compounds, namely MDMA and psilocybin, has attracted tremendous investment into this sector. And we're seeing from that money flowing in a tremendous amount of innovation and excitement. We also recognize, though, that we're going to be faced with similar challenges to medicinal cannabis, difficulty accessing patients, a lack of clinical evidence emerging, and the need to learn from patients as they're receiving care, which is exactly how we've structured things across Emerald clinics for Emyria. So we see a massive role and opportunity for Emyria to play here. But because of our interest in drug development, we're also able to move further downstream, upstream, I should say, into the drug development world and work with some of the early compounds that we think could potentially revolutionize this space as well. And so with partner, the University of Western Australia, we are leading a really intensive compound or MDMA-analogue development, expansion, and screening program with our partner. And we have obtained an incredible asset of more than 100 MDMA analogues that have been built carefully over 10 years by Dr. Matt Piggott and his team at the UWA. And we're continuing to grow that library, take it through some in vitro screening assessments, which are cell experiments that give us a sense of where these treatments may work most effectively. And we're preparing the most promising compounds for animal studies. And that's allowing us to actually recognize and identify some potential therapies in a number of really compelling spaces, both as next generation psychedelic assisted therapies, but also as treatments for neurological and non-neurological disorders emerging from those compounds as well. what makes this library so fascinating and so unique is that it's working with MDMA, which has traditionally been a very, very difficult compound to work with, not least of which because it is essentially a Schedule 1 or Schedule 9 medicine here in Australia, which means there are tight legal controls around the access of that drug and the ability to work and research with it. And so that has kept many people out of this space. And so Dr. Matt Piggott, somewhat uniquely, has been sort of a leader in this field and able to work with this compound for more than 10 years. And he's built this library systematically over that period of time. And so we're really excited about its potential of where it can go. MDMA is a lovely molecule to work with. It's small, stable salt, crosses the blood-brain barrier. So it's actually an ideal candidate for neurological treatment. And to date, we've already screened 85 compounds that have had clear screening results. So we've got a bevy of leads to work with, which we're now triaging into priority compound groups for animal screening and a variety of other experiments and tests as well. So really exciting early work there. And so that gives us this great preclinical pipeline in MDMA-analog space, which we believe will start to show some great results and promise from through our animal trials coming up shortly. Ultimately, all of this work and research effort has created a robust IP portfolio as well, which continues to grow as we identify new insights from our formulation work, our methods of treatment, and of course our new chemical entity work as well. And so ultimately that brings me to the concluding slide, which are, why invest in Emyria? Why support us? Well, here are 6 highlights to think about. We've got this world-class team, FDA registration expertise, lots of biotech expertise as well. We've got the in-house capabilities to do care delivery, drug development, and data analysis, which makes us really unique. We have this incredible data asset from our real patients. So we're able to learn from patients while we're providing care, and we're able to use that clinical infrastructure to ask new questions as new ideas and new treatments become available to us. Ultimately, we think that can accelerate drug registration now that we have some unique dose forms, and we've got multiple clinical programs targeting major unmet needs with global potential. We now have a really unique and high-performing ultra-pure cannabinoid-based medicine and a platform on which to build new treatments that are highly effective with great dose profiles and obviously the purity and reliability that's needed for registration. And coming up behind that, we have an MDMA-analog library of tremendous promise with many compounds that we think could potentially become breakthrough medications for major mental health and non-neurological disorders also. And ultimately, I think we have an attractive valuation given our stage of growth, given our upward potential. And we've got a really strong register, as you noted by Tattering support and the directors holding so much of that stock as well. Great. So with that, I'd welcome questions and comments. Jane, thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Michael. And we have had a few questions come through. And again, I encourage our webinar attendees to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, but I will jump into them now. So investors were probably expecting EMD RX5 to have better bioavailability compared to the Epidiolex. So how do you interpret the results?
Yeah, this is a great question. So we actually really delighted to see the equivalent bioavailability in our human study. There's a couple of important differences between the human trial and the dog study. One, dogs are not great great models for what might happen in people. The other key feature, though, is in our dog study, it was a fasted study. So we weren't providing food alongside the medical treatment of those animals as well. We did provide food in the human study, which is commonly how you would prescribe CBD medication. You'd normally provide it with instructions to take it with food. We know that providing food gives Epidiolex a big bioavailability boost. So we're actually giving the advantage, giving the edge to Epidiolex in a fed head-to-head study. And so what we're probably seeing is that in a fasted state, EMDRX5 performs slightly better than Epidiolex. In a fed state, essentially equivalent with that preferred dosing profile that we actually achieved. So actually, I think the result we achieved was excellent. I think it is an intriguing question what might happen if the differences do maintain themselves in a fasted state which would be a follow-on trial that we'd be interested to do. But importantly, it does give us an ability to choose between the different options that we looked at. And we've got EMDRX7 as well in the mix, with 4 times the bioavailability observed in the dog study, and potentially that relative bioavailability advantage may persist in the human trials as well. And so, of course, now we're intrigued to see how that performs and taking that to phase 1 next quarter.
Wonderful. And also, so what do you mean about ultra pure CBD, and why does it matter?
That's another good question. So ultra pure essentially means a CBD that's created in really pristine conditions in a lab. And by doing that, we can ensure that there is none of the impurities that can sometimes coexist with plant-derived CBD. It is not uncommon, ultimately, for most medications to make their way to a point where they are developed in that fashion, biosynthesized or created in a lab. It is true that 40% of our registered medications got their initial inspiration from plants. I usually have a slide on this point. And what that means is everything from aspirin came from willow bark, penicillin came from a mold. We've got statins, which are a blockbuster medication that help lower cholesterol, originally found in mushrooms or a kind of fungus. But of course, we're not creating fungus preparations. We're not taking mold for our infections. We ultimately take a reliable, proven, consistent drug that is typically, perfected in a lab environment where the purity can be reliably developed. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. There's a two-part question that's popped up here. So can you please touch on if and how the compounds differ from RX5 and RX7, and then what kind of PK results you're expecting from RX7?
Yeah, so there are quite distinct formulations. There is a different kind of excipient, which means a different kind of component ingredient that we're mixing with the CBD in between those formulations. And so that's why we're getting a different kind of PK profile. We would expect to see a relative difference maintained, as I mentioned, in a human study. Obviously, we need to put that to the test, but we do think that RX7, because of its such a higher bioavailability achieved in the dogs, that we would see a relative gain to a similar amount in the human studies as well. We'll find out for sure next month or so when we commence that phase 1 trial. But I would expect we'd see higher bioavailability for RX7. We get equivalent bioavailability for RX5, and we'll certainly get an answer to that question in the head-to-head study.
Well, that actually leads me to my next question. So what is next for EMD RX5?
Okay, so for RX5, it's quite clear. We go straight to pivotal registration trials. These are the phase 3 randomized control trials. We go head-to-head against placebo, running 2 arms of treatment for RX5, different dose strengths to get a comparative understanding of how the drug performs at different dose strengths against placebo. We've already selected the trial sites around Australia. We can use our Emerald Clinics network as well to accelerate referral. I think that will go very smoothly, and that will kick off in the next couple of months. And so that will take us to registration. That'll give us the evidence we need to make a submission to the TGA, who will then ultimately decide whether to register our treatment or not. Coming up in parallel, though, we'll take RX7 through the phase 1 trial. We basically have it follow up behind, and then we will announce shortly the target indications for RX7. But we're going perhaps, I think, more for prescription level, not so much over the counter for RX7. I think it has potential for indications where we need to give much higher delivery of CBD to get a clinical benefit. And of course, in the works, we've got combination treatments under development as well in formulation that then we'll take through that early stage drug development process too. But RX5 is our lead. It's front of the race, so to speak, and achieving over-the-counter registration with the TGA is our first goal for that dose form.
Wonderful. There's just another question that's popped up here. So what were Karen Smith's thoughts or feedback on the phase 1 data from RX5?
Yeah, she was really pleased. Helped us understand and appreciate, I guess, a couple of the key profile differences that really matter. One is the less variability being a really key highlight. So Epidiolex is quite spiky, as I mentioned. And so it is harder to predict in an individual how they may respond, what those ultimate dose concentrations might be that are delivered to that individual because there's a lot of interperson variation in how this drug is absorbed and I guess processed. We saw less of that variability in our drug, so that was a really key feature. The other thing was the slower release profile, which I think is ideal for indications where you want a treatment effect to last throughout the day and support once or twice daily dosing. So that's also really, really key as well. We know that having a solid oral dose form is a lot more convenient way for many patients to take a medication. It's how we are used to take a medication. If you are on multiple therapies, it's not as common to take oils for other kinds of medications. And so we think that advantage alone could be very interesting. And importantly, the safety, the fact that it was tolerated incredibly well by all the participants is really key as well. So yeah, she's really pleased and obviously cheering us on for some of the US work that we hope to do next.
Wonderful. And look, just finally, you have actually mentioned this already, but throughout the Q&A session, but so what else should shareholders be looking forward to, say, the next 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, we're a really busy and active company. If you follow our work, we've got many things going on in the works, and I haven't even spoken about the care models or the development or the data research that go on behind to support all of this great work. So we're thinking about our different programs in the cannabinoid space, hitting the clinic, phase 3 trials for RX5, phase 1 trials for RX7, and then some of the early preclinical animal work for some of our other treatments as well. So each of those are all running in parallel at the moment, following their own trajectory. For each of those, as well as we get data back from those clinical trial programs, we have clarity and line of sight on where we want to take things next for the US and overseas registration. Coming up behind that, or sitting beside it, is the MDMA-analogue program, which goes to animal studies in a number of different domains. So we're testing different kinds of theories and concepts for based on the screening data that we received back to date. And so some of those early results will start to come together as well and give us an ability to have a conversation with the market on where we think these MDMA compounds are best suited.
Brilliant. Well, Michael, it looks like we've covered everything for today. And thank you all for joining us today for the Emyria Limited Investor Webinar. If you do have any other further questions, please feel free to reach out via the contact details on the bottom of our ASX releases. But a copy of today's recording will be available online on Emyria's website in the coming days.
Great.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks.